Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. And welcome to a new regular segment on the state of the markets, the health and challenges of the economy, and what it means to you. Our guest will be Thomas Caldwell. He is the founder and chairman of Caldwell Securities with offices in Toronto and elsewhere. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So I guess the first thing I'd like to ask is just give us, since you are a securities company, what is the state of the markets right now in Toronto, in Canada, and what can you tell us about that?
Well, let me give you my qualifications first, and that is that I'm an incurable optimist. Markets have had a tremendously positive tone ever since the catastrophe of March of last year. We've come up almost straight up, 40% gains plus. The part of it is fueled by the hope that we're going to get through this COVID shutdown period, that vaccines will come online sooner than has been the case. But aside from that, there's a tremendous amount of money sloshing around looking for opportunities. And interest rates, of course, are very, very low, which has driven money toward assets. We haven't experienced cost of living inflation, but we have experienced asset value inflation. That is in houses, artwork, wine collections, and certainly stock market. So we're still living through that. There still is a positive tone because of rates still being so low and anticipated to stay low at least for a while.
And where do you see investment trends?
Well, I still think there is a positive underpinning to markets in that we're seeing, for example, in the areas that have opened up, Florida and New York, the economies have just taken off.
Right.
That would speak to a fairly robust recovery if, as and when, our leaders entrust people's futures to the people. So I think when we get through this lockdown phase or phases, you may see a stronger recovery. It just depends how long it takes and what kind of chicanery is going to go on and whether we release one and not another. I mean, if you make it too complicated, it could undercut that. But basically, the tone underlying is still positive. Low interest rates, lots of cash, looking for homes, and the feeling that they're going to see some kind of strong recovery. So the underlying tone, Tony, is still, I think, relatively positive.
Would you, you said at the outset that you're an optimist, you're from the school of optimism. Do you see us, once COVID is finally dealt with, at least in a meaningful way, let's put it that way, because it may be around forever for all we know, but it could be at least contained. If and when that happens, do you see us kind of there's a lot of theories going around. Is this going to be the next roaring 20s, I guess is what I'm trying to ask you.
Anything is possible, but, you've been in government, so you are fully aware of the fact you can never underestimate the ability of governments to really put the economy in the ash can. There's a lot of wild cards going on in Ottawa at the present time. So we don't know what the shape of this is going to look like and how much steam they can take out of this as we go forward. I don't think necessarily a roaring 20s. We've had a pretty good recovery, a pretty good period of time for quite a while now. If anything, if you look at markets, they're almost taking a breath, although Toronto is stronger today because we see energy and banks. These are heavily weighted indices. But I still, as I say, I still think it's going to have a positive tone toward the upside. And what that's really saying is people want to get out of money, that is out of cash, right, and into stuff. And that includes houses, as I say, equity prices. So there's this other dynamic going on. It isn't totally happy days are here again. We're going to do really, really well going forward. What they're really saying is, I don't want to be holding this cash because I can't get any return on it. And coupled with the fact that asset prices are still moving upward.
Yeah, so they're still trying to chase the returns and make sure they get the best return on their investment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're going to continue with our discussion with Thomas Caldwell. He is the founder and chairman of Caldwell Securities right after this break, so please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, here with Thomas Caldwell. He is the founder and chairman of Caldwell Securities. I get you alluded to this, Tom, right at the beginning. Inflation, possibilities there, higher interest rates, that might be looming on the horizon. Can you get your crystal ball out a little bit? Where are we headed on those things?
Well, as I say, the kind of inflation we have experienced to date is asset value inflation, not cost of living inflation, which is what governments measure and talk about. Cost of living inflation has been moderate, and it's probably going to stay moderate for a little while. Okay. But this asset value inflation, and that includes housing prices, has been very, very significant as people try to get into stuff and out of cash. Going forward, if we take, as I mentioned earlier, the examples of Florida and New York, a very positive, strong recovery coming out of this as we unleash the economy again. The challenge could be that governments, as you know, always want to be seen as doing something to pound their chest about and say, look at what we've done for you. Mm-hmm. And they may be coming into this strong recovery with all kinds of recovery funds to look as if they've been doing something valid through this. And that can exacerbate a recovery. But inflation still has to be based at some degree on the availability of labor. And there's still lots of people not employed or underemployed. So right. I can't see the pressures there, other than, of course, with dock workers in Montreal.
Apparently, they need to be back at work. That's true.
Absolutely. So well, they're just not getting paid enough.
Yeah, exactly. So let's lead into then the talk of the budget of a couple of weeks ago now. You've alluded to that as well. First of all, what's your perspective on that? And secondly, I want to tie that to the debate that is continuing with the budget, where people are saying there's a lot of stimulus money in that budget. Maybe it's not necessary because you're talking about a V-shaped recovery. And maybe we don't need all that stimulus money, and yet the government is intent on spending it. So I'm not trying to couch what you want to say, but that certainly is the debate that's been going on.
That's like multiple choice. You're giving me the answers in the question. I appreciate that. I need all the help I can get.
No worries.
Let me put it this way. I don't consider it a budget. It's not a budget. It's a vote-buying exercise. Hey, we're going to spend this money to get this economy going. The economy is going to be going without the skill set evident in Ottawa. My basic point here is that a budget implies what you're going to spend versus what's coming in. Mm-hmm. And whether it be provincially or federally, nobody knows what's going to be coming in. There's no idea of what your tax revenues are actually going to look like coming out of this. It is dependent on the length of the shutdown, the structural damage done, particularly in the small business sector. So it's not a budget because you only have one side of the equation. That is what you're going to spend. And make no mistake, that one side of the equation is done to buy votes. We're going to give you money for absolutely anything you want. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to discuss the cost until after we have an election. Then we're going to have to pay the piper in some form or other, whichever government party forms the government.
Right.
And so it's really a vote buying exercise. A budget has two sides to it. How much money do you have coming in? How much are you going to blow? How much are you going to spend on the other side? And we've only got the one side, how much we're going to spend because we're really nice guys and you want to support us. And by the way, we'll let you know the cost later.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is leading up to the budget in the year that we didn't have a budget in Canada in the federal government, and related to this budget 2021, the corporate revenues actually were quite robust, but the government decided to spend all that money, and then spend some more money. So that goes to your point that this is a spending exercise.
Absolutely, and we're creating a mountain of debt. Frankly, the biggest spending in the history of Canada, other than World War II, was Trudeau 1, and now we're into Trudeau 2, where he's eclipsing Trudeau 1 in terms of spending. Now, I'm not picking on the family or any particular party, but those are the two peaks in terms of spending in Canada. And listen, I'm old enough, I'm not going to have to worry about this, but I look at my children, I look at my grandchildren, that there's some big debts here that are going to have to be paid. And there's only a couple ways you pay down debts. You grow the economy. I haven't seen any great plans to grow the economy per se, quite the contrary. Or you inflate it out of existence, because nobody ever really pays it down.
And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Thomas Caldwell. He's the founder and chairman of Caldwell Securities. This is going to be a regular segment on our program to discuss the issues of the day. Tom, just to stay with the budget just for a second, obviously there were some tax hikes in the budget. I'm putting my own spin on it, I guess. Nothing too onerous, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But of course, your point is for future generations, all of this spending will become tax hikes in the future. So maybe give us your perspective on that.
Well, when you talk about the increases in tax, if I might use the cliche, you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, there's going to be a lot more coming. The thing that concerns me is that, quite frankly, I mean, I'm getting more and more cynical in my old age as I look at governments and their spending. I'm worried that in Canada, in Ottawa in particular, we're going to look to the United States to use their examples. And if I had to give our federal government any kind of advice, don't ever do what they're doing in the United States. Do exactly the opposite, but for Pete's sake, don't adopt it. Their tax system is so I've worked in New York for years. I was a member of the New York Stock Exchange. The tax system is so incredibly complex. And by the way, the rich always find a way to loop around it. The complexities of structures that they create down there to avoid successfully taxes will continue. So we have some really good systems in Canada, quite simple, quite straightforward. Don't complexify it, if that's a word, it should be, our tax system to line up with the U.S. But I think that's going to be a temptation that our government's going to fall into, that let's tax the rich. And by the way, there just aren't enough rich people around to raise enough money to do what you need to do, and not I'm saying that they should be protected. They shouldn't. I mean, if you're making more, you should pay more. I understand that. But I always laugh when a tax authorities comes that everybody pays their fair share. Fair share is always defined by somebody else. It's decidedly unfair. But I think we want to keep a tax system that's simple. As you know, the U.S. has been saying we should have a standard tax right across the free world, which, by the way, which would be set by the United States.
Yeah.
Well, governments like competition and anything other than governments. Why shouldn't I have the opportunity to move to a jurisdiction that's more favorable, et cetera? Not that I plan to move to the Bahamas or anything else like that. But I do think we want to keep our tax system simple. And it's very easy. That's the Achilles heel of democracy. We have a humongous victim industry in Canada, which continually gets fed with taxpayer dollars. Everybody's a victim of some kind. There's always a wrong that needs righted, historically, currently, or possibly in the future. I think we really have to look at what concerns me with budgets. Budgets are only part of running government. What is really needed is a clear vision. What does Canada want to be when it grows up? What are we going to encourage? How are we going to encourage real world beater companies? What is our vision aside from the old hackneyed issues that governments have been beating us over the head with for decades now? How are we going to build Canada? Are we going to get pride in ourselves? That kind of thing. We've got to go back behind the budgets to say, what is the nature of the country we want to have? And then adopt a tax system and spending regime that encourages that vision. And I haven't heard that from either party, frankly.
Right. So that's I was going to say that's what you're expecting, but you didn't get that in the budget, and you're not getting it in terms of the political debate in Ottawa. Is that right?
Tony, I've learned the secret to happiness: low expectations. I have no expectations when it comes to Ottawa. Period.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's that saying? Without vision, the people perish. So I think that's the
Absolutely.
point. That's the point you're making. And we've got about a minute before the break, but your point is also that this might affect the post-COVID recovery if these political decisions are not made properly.
Well, the recovery is the main thing. I mean, clearly we have an issue here, and the issue is we don't have enough vaccines to go around to get back into business quickly. We may see restrictions on Canadians going to the United States when they've done their vaccinations and we have not. That's the number one problem. It's been a mess up, and we've missed all kinds of danger points. For example, it took us weeks before we canceled flights from India, and it's too late. That variant's already here. So we've got to be a little bit smarter in making decisions. You know, in the middle of a battle, you don't have time to study stuff. You got to make decisions. You got to make them fast, and you got to have courage. And we've missed that opportunity. A, to have adequate vaccines and to have an industry that produces it. B, to shut down doors that were bringing this infection in at an incredible rate. And we've missed that opportunity. We've missed decisiveness where we need to have decisiveness.
And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Thomas Caldwell. He is the founder and chairman of Caldwell Securities. Tom, I just want to take you back to one of the points you were making about President Joe Biden and some of his policies. We were talking about how he wants to level up other people's tax systems because he is intent on increasing corporate taxation in the U.S. He's also got a massive stimulus bill, which they are going to push through Congress, it looks like. So tell us about your take on that and the impact that will have on Canada, our markets, and our own recovery.
Well, the United States is doing well as the varying areas come out of lockdown, and that's a positive thing. As I say, I think some of the stimulus spending, if you will, may prove to be redundant, that is unnecessary. And if it is unnecessary, it will be inflationary to some degree. The package is, from what I can see of it, and I haven't done full detail of it, but they talk about infrastructure. Now they're defining what is infrastructure, daycare, for example. So I think a lot of it is political in the spending. I think it's reasonable to assume that there are many significant spending pressure groups within the Democratic Party. I don't know that the president is as strong as he might be, but rather responding to pressure within his constituency and wanting to be seen as decisive. But in actual fact, he's not being decisive. So this is positive in the point it is you're going to have growth. You may even have inflation, but not for a little while. As I mentioned earlier, inflation still needs a fairly tight job market. Right. We're seeing it in lumber prices and other things, but there's still lots of slack within the job market in the U.S. and indeed in Canada. But I think we're going to see reasonable recoveries. Canada can do very well, but make no mistake, our American cousins are extremely protectionist. We've seen it in terms of sharing vaccines, which is understandable, by the way. Right. And we've seen it in Buy American. So anytime they spend money, they got this Buy American. And by the way, Canadians are not considered Americans. So we have to fight for almost every inch of trade we can actually get. And even though we have a free trade agreement of sorts, that border gets thickened up with minor regulations on a regular basis. And Canadian exports have a tough time getting into that market. One thing I will say about Trudeau, one, is he tried to get us away from the U.S., and frankly, we were unable to do it. We have to look at a world market. We're in a tough neighborhood. Canada's in a tough neighborhood. We're a trading nation. Right. And we have to think in bigger terms beyond the United States.
And so does that mean for you, obviously we have a European agreement already. We've got to obviously stitch up a new agreement with the UK now that it's out of Europe. Does that also mean Asia? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, there are lots of things we could have, should have, and might have done. For example, liquefied natural gas. Mm-hmm. You know, we have been talking for 20 years about building a plant in the BC to export to the Asian markets. We still haven't done it. Americans have built plants. Countries all over the world with natural gas are exporting LNG. And by the way, if you're a big environmentalist, that's a very positive thing to do in terms of environmental, because that liquid natural gas is going to Asia and the other countries, and it's replacing coal, right, which is a significant improvement. But we've never got our brains around that. And that's what I mean by creating an environment for world beater countries. We don't even need agreements. Government's sitting down and saying, oh, we have an agreement in principle. It still comes down to business doing something and being encouraged to do something, and we still are on our hind foot when it comes to that. And like it or not, no matter where you are in the climate change argument, we're going to have hydrocarbon fueling of some kind. All this electricity we're going to use, where's it going to come from?
Right.
We're running out of waterfalls. There aren't any of those left. So it's either got to come from gas-fired generating plants or nuclear. And there's not a big appetite for either because, listen, the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. We got to get it somewhere, and we're going to have monster electrical demand. So there's stuff we can be doing, right, but government has to be a positive and encouraging host environment for those enterprises.
Our time is up. Thomas Caldwell, I know it's hard to believe, but time goes very quickly. We obviously have to have you back because there's a lot to discuss, but thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks very much, Tony.
I want to thank Tom Caldwell, the founder and chairman of Caldwell Securities, for coming on the program, discussing the budget, discussing capital markets, Canada, U.S. There's a lot to chew on there. Clearly, we'll have to have him back for more discussions, but it's great to have that kind of wisdom on our show. Thanks for watching.